The Turkish people are about to have their say on a referendum that could significantly increase the powers of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Turkey is holding a constitutional referendum this weekend on replacing its parliamentary system with a presidential one. Voters will weigh in on 18 proposed amendments that could give President Erdogan sweeping new powers to appoint ministers, prepare a budget, and enact certain laws by decree. We begin our coverage with CGTN's Natalie Carney from Istanbul. And Natalie, why is the Turkish government, specifically President Erdogan, seeking this referendum? What would it accomplish?
Well, the president's power really has been increasing steadily in the country since his ruling Justice and Development Party came into power back in 2002. Of course, Erdogan has served 3 terms as Prime Minister of Turkey and most recently, of course, as president. Now, while constitutionally the president is sort of more of a ceremonial role at present, he really has been sort of pushing, you could say, his electoral mandate in that regard. If these constitutional changes are confirmed with a majority of the population voting yes, then we could see Erdogan's power lasting until around 2029, so certainly a substantial amount of time. Now, the yes camp argues that progress in the country has very much stalled over the last few years due to sort of intervention from exterior parties, due to an increase of violence in the country. And also because of the problems that have been faced within Parliament, lots of infighting and bickering between the different parties and within some of the same parties. So they argue that these constitutional changes are needed to sort of clean up things and push measures through that need to be pushed through so that this country can develop and can flourish. So that's their main argument in regards to this. Another point is that Turkey's constitution was written back in 1982, largely by a committee that was dominated mostly by the Turkish military. This followed the 1980 military coup in the country. So there is the argument on both sides, yes and no. There is the agreement that the Constitution does need some updating, does need to change. You know, the yes camp says it needs to reflect the present time and the present difficulties. The no camp, however, definitely does say that Erdogan is the reason behind some of these difficulties. So it's going to be a very interesting test going forward to see how the country weighs in.
Natalie, Turkish citizens living in 6 European countries are participating in this referendum. How unusual is this, and could it affect the outcome?
Well, it is very common for expat Turks to vote in elections, and it's very common for Turkey's ministers to be campaigning in those countries. There were some problems in a recent attempt to campaign, particularly in the Netherlands. But what we're seeing as a backlash of that is that it turned out that less Dutch Turks turned out to vote. Now, what that actually means is difficult to assess at this moment, being that the actual results from the elections in the Netherlands for the Turks are not yet out. But it could show that maybe because of the situation that recently occurred, those that were going to vote yes were somewhat cautious and decided to maybe they would vote no, and vice versa. So it's interesting to see how that will turn out. Germany, meanwhile, again, more problems arose there recently, and Turkish ministers trying to rally the Turkish population in Germany. That population has long been quite staunchly AKP supporters, and what we saw is that a lot more Turks actually turned out to vote in this referendum in Germany. So again, it'll be quite interesting to see how those results come in. But I think most importantly, the problems that recently arose between EU and Turkey probably played quite well into Erdogan's hands domestically. Particularly with the nationalists, who are really looking for that strong leader who will stand up to the European Union and not let Turkey be pushed around, but also with a lot of undecideds here who really didn't see the treatment by the EU or by those 2 particular countries to be that nice and that courteous, let's say. So that played well again into Erdogan's hands. He he was the one who stood up to the EU and sort of had Turkey's back, so to speak. So again, it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. But as we hear right now, it's a really tight race.
Thanks, Natalie. That's CGTN's Natalie Carney reporting from Istanbul.